Alrighty, just in the absolute final leg. Just going to put a bit of wire on this evaporative cooler. Here you'll see videos of this at a later point that shows the whole way it was made and everything. Tomorrow is going to be somewhere north of about 105. I think it's going to be something like that. Real bad. Might be more like 108 or 110 actually. So anyway, I've been finishing that. I like the fact now it's full blooming, you know, flick a switch on and all the misters fire up inside it, and what doesn't end up as a misting fan ends up as an evaporative cooler, thanks to these little micro jets here. Anyway, just want to talk a bit about taxes and Trump with his taxes and whatnot. First of all, the death tax. Well, first of all, I'll touch on international taxing a little bit. In some of the things I've been up to lately, I have been learning a lot about tax havens and things of that nature, and how to reduce your tax to a very low amount. And generally speaking, around the world, the idea is that if you move to a country, you become a resident of that country, and then you know, can experience their lack of taxes, and that's the case here in Australia. What they have is you have areas where there's low tax, and everybody goes, oh, I want to move to those areas, and they're nice areas and all that, but you'll find some of the house prices are fairly pumped up by the millionaires who have moved there, and the billionaires and whatnot. But most interestingly, there's other countries that you've never heard of as tax havens, and they have what they call like a territorial tax. So they tax you on money that's earned inside that country. But if you have a big internet business, like this guy who talks about all this stuff, you know, is an expert in international taxes, the guy I've been watching, and he basically, if you've got like an e-store or an internet-based business, you're the best of all, because you can run it from any country because of the internet. You know, you just hook onto Wi-Fi somewhere and off you go. But the long and short of it is that with territorial taxes, there's all these places you never knew were tax havens that suddenly appear. And what it means with the territorial tax is, Thailand is one of the great examples here, because if you go and live in Thailand, you will be taxed on any money you earn in Thailand. But if you own a business in Australia, you can bring over all this money, and you're not taxed on any of the money that's not earned in that country. That's why they call it a territorial tax. The country in which you reside taxes you for the money earned within their territory, within their jurisdiction, but not any money earned elsewhere. And so essentially you live a tax-free life with a whole heap of spicy food and cute little Thai girls running around. Anyway, there's not just that. There's, well, Brunei, Malaysia is becoming a more common and well-known one, and that's sort of all right, because that's, you know, there's a lot of Chinese. Well, they had a break-up. It was Malaya, and it split into Singapore and Malaysia, and most of the Chinese went to Singapore, but not all of them did. They actually killed a hell of a lot of Chinese in that big squabble, and if I'm not incorrect, there was communism involved as well, and it was a real shitstorm. But the long and short of it is that you've got Asians there. Some are Chinese, some are not, But it's a former British colony, so they all speak English. And that the prices haven't got completely ridiculous there, and that's sort of, you know, one who's probably the most promising one for a lot of people at the moment. But yeah, Brunei is another one that's on this island that they've got a tiny little pocket, and Indonesia is the main holder of this island, but there is actually 4 separate countries on this island, and Brunei's got a nice little pocket in the corner there. Sultan of Brunei used to be one of the richest people in the world. But if you are, you know, if you've got a US passport, if you've got a US green card, they will chase you all around the world for taxes. In Australia, and it's quite specifically mentioned Australia, you just have to show that you've shut down your life in Australia, you've disconnected your phones, you've sold your car, you've got no vehicles registered under your name, you've got no property owned under your name, boom, 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 boom. Doesn't mean that your home property isn't owned by a foreign corporation, but just not under your name. And that you have, like the common one is a lease agreement for a house in this foreign country, and show that you've got an internet connection, a phone connection, a cell phone, a fucking laundry service, whatever the fuck else you can, to prove that your life now revolves around residency in that country. And that's how it works in Australia, and it works usually that way for England and Canada and basically the majority of the world. Some places in Europe, like Norway, I think, or Sweden, will continue to tax you for another 3 years as though you're still a resident of their country. Even after you've left, they'll tax you for another 3 years, maybe 5 years. I think it's only 3 years. But if you've got a US green card or US passport, they will continue to tax you no matter where the fuck you are. There are stories of guys who have been married to a Swiss woman, living in Switzerland for 30 years, and somehow 30 years down the track, the US government writes him a letter and say, you owe us a few $100,000 in taxes. You can't make this up. Eritrea, which is some little, well, it's above Djibouti. It's, you go across from where Saudi Arabia is, you go west, and you'll see it's a little shithole that's spent 25 years in war, pretty much. And it's a mess of a country, and they're the only other country that has that. But they don't even enforce it, because they've got fuck all, because they've destroyed themselves through so many years of war, and fighting the neighbours and everything like that. And them and the US are the only ones that have got it. They will chase you for taxes all around the world. The only way to get out of it is renounce your US citizenship. I'm not joking. Anyway, on to death taxes. They used to have death taxes here in Australia, and during the 1970s, I believe it was probably about 1977-ish, maybe 78, probably 77, somewhere around there, Queensland, my parents were in Queensland at the time, and this is why they remembered it so specifically, Queensland was the first state to say, we are scrapping the death tax. And it was a fairly high old tax. I mean, it was like 30% or something like that, maybe more, on your estate. And so, you know, people had to, you know, do what they've done in the US, which is refinance the farm and go like hell and hope they don't get fucking repoed and everything like that. And the long and short of it is, they had an idea, we don't have enough economic activity here, we need more people living in Queensland. Now, once you're a pensioner, you can pick up your pensioner anywhere in the country. So what they decided was, I know what we'll do, we'll cut the death tax, and we'll be the only state in the country that's cut the death tax, which means we'll have a big influx of retired people move here. Because, you know, we're not going to grab any of their estate or any of their inheritance, and especially if they, you know, really aren't too attached to the property they're living in and they're willing to sell it. Of course, this was pre-capital gains tax. Capital gains tax didn't exist back then. That came into force in 1986. Or they're renting a place or whatever, you know, or they've got a lot of money in the bank or whatever, you know, we will have all these old people move up there, and then we'll have more residents who are getting a pension, or just purely because they're living there, they're spending, you know, their money there, which, you know, let's face it, the idea was it was aimed at pensioners or people getting fairly old, and you know, the idea is if they all move here and they die here, then they're going to avoid having a big hunk of their estate grabbed. That was the idea, and the idea worked, and it worked well, and they had a shitload of people move up there. And then after that, they, you know, other states slowly got rid of it, and one after the other. Some of these other states, you know, slowly got rid of it. And I don't know, but there was talk of it coming back in here in 1991 when we were in a, not we, because I was in Western Australia still, but when Victoria was in a severe blooming recession, you know, there was a fair recession that rippled around the country, and it centred not too far from where I'm living. It was sort of, you know, my state had a particular building society which went arse up, and, you know, I'll put it in perspective. This building society went fucking just boom, just collapsed, and in the process it took down a state-owned savings bank and several other banks with it. And you know, it went off like a fucking nuke. To put it into context, most people back then were earning probably $300 to $320 a week. That was their take-home pay. This bank lost $2 billion. $2 billion went down the fucking shithole. And when push come to shove, there was almost nothing to claw back. People got fucking close to zilch back, you know. It's only a couple of cents on the dollar, if anything. And this was the thing, pretty much $2 billion just disappeared in a time where most people were earning about $300, $320 a week for a basic labour job. And, you know, in that it took out about another 3 other banks in the process. And during that point, and they ended up selling off a bunch of state assets. The state itself was in severe debt, so they ended up selling off all the power stations and the power lines and everything like that, and at a later point they sold off the power substations, but they sold off the distribution network, i.e. the pylons and the line system, and the, what's his name, the power stations themselves. First of all, they become privatised and whatnot to try and, you know, dig out of this debt. And yeah, a lot of it's all foreign owned and some of it's now Chinese owned. A lot of it's actually British and American owned, believe it or not. Or it was initially when they got rid of it. But anyway, at that point they were seriously thinking of bringing the death tax back here just to try and, you know, hold shit together to keep the state from completely dipping out, you know. And states here don't go bankrupt, but they were fucking sweating. I didn't say they were expecting bankruptcy, but the pressure was on, full on, because there was a lot of debt and a lot of fucking, yeah, people that got burnt badly. Another one that we had right up until about 1995 was tariffs. You know, I used to be a Ron Paul supporter, but there's no expansionism, there's no expansion mentality, it's scarcity mentality, a lot of the stuff, you know, with him, and, oh, you know, cut back the supply of money and this and that and blah, blah, and you know, if he was going to open full slather with no tariffs, free trade to every country in the world, including China and Laos, I mean, we're stupid enough that we've opened it up with Laos, which is also known as the poorest country in Asia. We've got a free trade agreement with them. Could you fucking believe it? You know, if he had done that and there was no tariffs, Americans would be forced to live at the level of peasants to compete. It'd be simple as that. I will say that tariffs served us very well because we exported a lot of raw resources to build up Japan first of all, and more recently China, and we're still exporting shit to China. You know, and we kept a lot of our money inside our own country by having tariffs, with not a great deal of imports, except the Japanese sent us a lot of stuff, as you could well expect back in those days, and plenty of exports, and you know, piles of exports, a few, but not completely open slather imports, and a lot of spending money amongst ourselves, buying our own products, and it made us fairly wealthy. And most people had a job because we had tariffs on clothing, we had tariffs on cars. I know people in the auto industry told me it was the 35% tariff on imported cars. And now you're back to about 5%. And the clothing industry is the same. Anything from 0% to 10% for the clothing industry. I know that for a fact. And tariffs done us well, but everyone's, oh, well, the Harley Smoot tariffs back in the fucking 1930s, Dust Bowl, Depression, blah, blah, done no good because they sold all this food to other countries, and, you know, these tariffs wrecked America's ability to fucking, oh, fuck me. It was the 1920s, you know, fucking hell. There was a Dust Bowl, there was a shortage of food production. You know, things were really, shortage of food production in the middle of a depression, you know, things were just fucked. You know, but once a country is developed, and you, mainly, the main point being, you're surrounded by a whole heap of developing countries who are poorer than you, or now that international trade's got to the level that it's gotten with globalisation, you know, it's, tariffs done us good. And I'm glad that he actually, you know, I used to have people tell me that tariffs won't fix America. And I used to say tariffs may well fix America. And I'm glad that Trump got onto that one and convinced people that that is a good thing. Because it is a good thing. You know, and everybody's all, oh, but back in the Harley Smoot frickin' rah-rahs, it was the fucking 1930s. America was developing, as was a lot of these, a lot of places that, you know, things were thin on the ground. You know, you weren't surrounded by them, and the cheap labour was in America itself, you know. It's not like it is today, sort of thing. And the fact is that, you know, oh, protectionism's bad. Well, fuck it. Why not look after your own? Fuck all this Chinese millionaires with all this Chinese rubbish they're importing, you know. Fuck them. You should look after your own. That's the whole idea, isn't it? Not sell out to some Chinese prick who's going to put lead paint on kids' toys. Fucking hell, you know. But anyway, the other one that I think is brilliant, and I mean, I got a lot of rants that I could make about this, but I've sort of held back on it for a long time. That is America's healthcare system. You know, I'll tell you, it is proof today that there is propaganda better than what Hitler achieved. Alive and well today in the so-called international connected world, and a lot of it is only caused, the reason, you know, this propaganda is all the shit you hear about your healthcare system. Oh, we've got the best healthcare system. It is the laughing stock of the entire Western world, that fucking shitstorm of a healthcare system that you guys have got. It's a fucking joke. And the trouble is, the joke's on you. When I can go and buy 100-pack of aspirins for $2, in this country where we get ripped off for everything, I can buy a 100-pack of aspirins for the equivalent of, you know, US $1.65, and you can probably buy a 100-pack for US $1. And you go into a fucking hospital, and for every aspirin they give you, they will charge $15 to $75 per aspirin. Well, they buy a whole pack of 100 for $1. You can buy a whole pack of 100 for $1. I can buy it for $1.65 or something like that. You know, there's something seriously wrong with your healthcare system, and I am very glad that he come out and said that public healthcare works in Canada and in Scotland and in some other countries, because this would be another one of the other countries. In fact, most of the other former British Empire countries have got both systems, public and private. Now private is better, you get one person per room, you get your own ensuite toilet, you get a fucking TV built into the roof, all the fan dangles, you know. But the pure fact that you have a public system there keeps the private system from getting overpriced and out of control. Do you know what I'm saying? If the private healthcare system was too expensive and too full of shit, people would neglect to use it and fall back to the public healthcare system that their taxes already paid for anyway. Now, essentially, we were initially just used to fund it out of people's income taxes, and well, actually they whack on another 1.5% on the end of your income tax, so you know your rate might be, say I'm paying about, I don't know what I'm paying. I think it was supposed to be about 25%, but I think I got cranked down by my employer to 20%, and then they'll whack another 1.5%. So you pay 21.5% as opposed to 20%, or 26.5% as opposed to 25%, or whatever it is. And that 1.5% extra was to fund the healthcare system. Now, as time's gone on, you know, they are willing to spend a little bit too much, and I think at times people need to draw a line in the sand to say, is it worth spending $1 million on a machine to keep some guy in a vegetative state alive but not conscious for another 6 months? Do we need to spend $1 million on it? You know, somebody's got to start drawing a line in the sand at some point with that sort of spending. But nobody does, because they'll be the fucking quote-unquote murderer for a guy who never had any chance of coming back out of that coma anyway. But we've eventually moved towards, we had multiple sales taxes that were different rates from 0% to 33%, and we had, you know, retail sales taxes, and we had wholesale taxes, and we wiped them all and had one GST. But that also meant goods and services tax. First time services started getting taxed individually. And we made it 10%, and what's happened now is they've just decided that all the states except Western Australia will take, like the federal government takes the 10% GST plus that 1.5% on the income tax and just spends the whole lot of it back on hospitals. And the only one who's not doing that is Western Australia, because of their extremely high productivity, because of the mines and the enormous farms and ranches and shit that they've got. And they've got such a high productivity that they have money left over after that 10%. In fact, they only use about half of what they fucking bring in, or something like that. So they collect their own GST and, you know, spend it on their healthcare system in their state, and then have money left to spare for other things. So I'm glad that it has, you know, been said, but at least he recognises it, you know. But to us, it is proof that modern propaganda is alive and well today. But more to the point, it is probably proof that Americans don't understand jack shit outside their own country. Really. They don't know much about anything that's not something happening inside America. They know everything about what's happening inside America, but they know fuck all about any other countries. Can't place them on a map, don't know shit about most of them. You can go and look at all the videos on YouTube. They can't name continents. They can't name fucking a lot of basic shit. There's a girl who's 11 years old walked around a fucking Walmart and said she had a world map with no names of countries on it. And she said, where do you think Japan is? And most people pointed to Colombia. No shit. So anyway, the long and short of it is you've been duped for years with a shitty system. Just lied to immensely. You know, I've seen some of these spin doctors on PBS News. We get news from all over the fucking world here. We get German news, we get Arabic news, Turkish news, Spanish news. You know, you fucking name it, we get it here. French news and, you know, PBS NewsHour. And I tell you what, I've seen some fucking glorious lying half-truth spin doctors on that shit. I tell you what. I think the American healthcare system probably has as many fucking spin doctors as it does actual doctors. I'm not sure, but you've got more spin doctors than you fucking need. I'll put it like that. There's probably one spin doctor for every fucking 4 to 8 normal doctors, to be honest. I don't know, but you got more spin doctors than you need, and them spin doctors ain't really curing anybody of fucking anything. You know. So anyway, that's a bit of a rant on the taxes that you guys are seeing and that we've seen. If you want to know here, you got to, you know, our dollar is only worth 3/4 what your dollar is, but our cut-off rate is it 16,800? Yeah, 16,800 before we start getting taxed. That's per person, not per couple. You get times that by 2 and that'll probably give you the couple rate. I'm not too sure, but I know as an individual person like myself, and it may, you know, well, they do, your tax rate changes a bit once you're married, because, you know, you got dependents and your wife has to declare hers in conjunction with yours, blah, blah. But, yeah, for an individual single person like myself, 16,800. And another thing they sometimes pretend is, oh, they're trying to push people onto the private healthcare system in Australia, blah, blah. Yeah. If you are single, and how does it work again? Under the age of 29, single and earning $80,000 or more a year. How many fucking people fall into the category of being single, earning $80,000 a year, and are under the age of fucking 30? Yeah, that's the ones they're trying to have and if you look at the cost of private healthcare versus just their lame 1.5% income tax, you're actually probably better to go with private healthcare. Give you an example. My nan had, well, you know, she was on private healthcare, $80 a month. She technically died 5 times from asthma attacks, and she'd had 1 heart attack, and here she was going in for a triple bypass. $80 a month for private healthcare. What are you paying in the States? A fucking lot more than that. I know what you're paying in the States, and I know it's a lot more than that. Especially for someone with as many medical fuck-ups as she had. You know, it's a wonder she's still alive. It's a wonder she lived past 75, but she made it right through to 89, you know. But anyway, that's me little tax rant.